What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Going the Distance podcast presented by ImmaculateSports.com. Twitter is at ImmacSports.
Instagram is also at MaxSports.
TikTok, YouTube, Immaculate Sports. It's episode 285. And today it's all about the March Madness preview. The first four is tipping off right now. We're about 10 minutes in, Dayton, Ohio. So that's how you know it's for real. We're only 2 days away from the big ones. And also a baseball game tonight, I'm sure we'll mention at least a little bit, but we're trying to get the show done before then.
Yeah, the gold medal game, I don't know if it's technically gold medal, but the championship game in the World Baseball Classic is today between Venezuela and the USA. Obviously, we'll probably touch more on that next week because that'll be after the game has concluded, and that will be when we are doing our MLB in-season preview. So excited for that. Before that, March Madness this week, we're just going to be going over a bracket. Shouldn't be a crazy long episode. Don't expect some, crazy analysis, especially for me here, because I've maybe watched 5 to 10 college basketball games all year, but got to do your March Madness picks right. So the opener, we'll start off with that, and you gave the Chiefs a QB.
Yeah, Justin Fields is gone, man. And after what happened last season, I really can't believe that the Jets were able to trade him for a pick, even if it was only a 2027 sixth rounder, because they also restructure his contract. The Jets beat report right now is just completely clueless. And probably would be frustrating for most NFL fans, but after the crazy amount of leaks we've had since the Rodgers era and even before, GM Darren Muji building a very strong case for a contract extension to return as the GM, no matter what happens to Glenn this year. So that is getting me excited right now, even though I think you have the best game of the week as your pick.
Yeah, it's been a great World Baseball Classic as usual. This one specifically for the USA, I feel like I've been less into than I have in the past, but I've been more into the other teams. And maybe it's just because it really feels like with this USA team that it doesn't mean as much as it does for these other countries. And that's maybe not just a feeling for me, that probably is a fact, because Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, all these countries, they take this shit seriously. In those countries, everybody's watching those games. It's like a 95% watch rate. And for Venezuela to beat Japan a couple of nights ago was one of the cooler, it's not like a crazy upset or anything like that, but just a cool moment for probably the casual baseball fans of seeing how passionate these countries are for this game and this sport. Venezuela obviously beats Japan. They qualify for the Olympics as well, too, in 2028, which is a big thing as well. Wily Abreu, go-ahead 3-run home run in the 7th inning, puts the Venezuela team up by, I believe what the final score was, 7-5. Just a cool, fun game, star-studded on both sides. I assume we'll see a similar, type of vibe tonight with those two teams. Cool to see Miami rocking. That stadium hasn't really had a ton of big MLB games, but it's definitely held a ton of cool, really World Baseball Classic games. And it's just, perfect precursor for the MLB season coming up. Obviously, it won't be as passionate for the MLB season, but World Baseball Classic is always good to have, and it gets us through the part of March until we have March Madness, and that's where we are at now. How we'll do this bracket, probably we'll go East, South, West, and then Midwest. Get our Final Four team from each side, and then we'll go ahead and do our Final Four from there. So we'll start off with the East. We'll start off with an easy one. I don't even think we really need to go into it yet. Duke versus Siena. We'll just move on to the next one. We know who's winning there. That's a 1 versus 16. The 8 versus 9 isn't as clear, though, of course. Ohio State versus TCU, 8 versus 9. Who do you have?
I'm going with Ohio State in this one. They are a slight favorite, 4.5 points right now. At the end of the day, they won a lot more big games than TCU did, kind of at the bottom half of the Big 12. And that ended up being the deciding factor. Games like winning against Purdue and Wisconsin last month.
This is the first game that we see, I believe. It's at 9:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Thursday. I went with TCU. So we do differ there, although there isn't really much analysis for
Yeah.
me. I just chose
Yeah.
TCU. 5 versus 12, St. John's versus Northern Iowa.
You know, a lot of people are on Northern Iowa right now. I guess the 512 is a very popular pick every year, but I can't pick against St. John's yet. I I don't know if they're as good as their one seed team last season, but what I do know is they handled UConn very well to finish off the season, and that's usually going to be in your favor going into a tournament like this.
Yeah, from everything I've seen, this game is a slow pace versus fast pace type of situation here. St. John's is really slow, methodical on offense. Northern Iowa is a team that will go out and chuck it. So I did pick Northern Iowa. I feel like it's a good upset possibility. There's always a couple of these each year where just the fast paced chuck and three team gets hot. And I feel like a bunch of guys know how to shoot threes in Northern Iowa. That makes sense. So I did go
Yeah.
with the upset pick there. Kansas 4, California Baptist CBU in here as the number 13 seed. Who do you have here?
Good for them, man. But again, here I can't pick against Kansas. Whether Darren Peterson's playing the whole game or not, Kansas has done way more than enough this season. They got a lot of Big 12 wins, and that was definitely the best conference this season.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation about Darren Peterson and his commitment to college basketball. I think when it gets to March Madness, whether it's him or his agent or whoever it may be, I think he's allowed to play a bit more freely here. And there's not going to be a single person on that Baptist team that is able to guard Darren Peterson. So even with my namesake Baptist in there, I did go with Kansas. 6 versus 11, always a interesting seed in college basketball. Louisville versus South Florida.
Another one would be really cool. I saw some people on Twitter talking about how South Florida may remind them of like the FAU Owls team that went on a pretty good run a couple years ago. But I'm going to go with Louisville still. I've seen them beat teams like Syracuse and North Carolina pretty easily this season, and they have one of the best point guards in the nation, Michael Brown Jr.
I did go Louisville. I don't think the Louisville run is super long, but getting past South Florida makes sense to me.
Mhm.
3 seeded Michigan State versus 14 seeded North Dakota State.
Another case of fast against slow, and it has gotten Michigan State in some trouble in the past, but I think they're going to be okay this season. I'm going Michigan State again, and I'm not thinking too hard about it.
I went Michigan State as well. 7 versus 10 is UCLA versus UCF.
UCLA definitely helped their case this past week. They played very, very well in the Big Ten tournament. I'm keeping that going. A big thing I like to have on my brackets, at least, maybe not everybody, but if your team was really hot ending the season, then I feel like I got to pick you in the first round if you're going up against a 10 seed from the not American, excuse me, Big 12, bottom of the Big 12, like UCF now.
Yeah, UCLA versus UCF. I did go UCLA as well too. One of the slower paced teams I saw in college basketball. Plays good defense. I did go with them. 2 versus 15, UConn versus Furman. I don't think we need to get into UConn yet, so we
Nope.
probably both have UConn going on, which takes us now to the South where we don't need to go too far. It is Florida moving on to the next game. I'm not even going to say the 16 seeds
Yeah.
because we don't need to know them. 8 versus 9 is Clemson versus Iowa. I saw this is an interesting game here.
Yeah, it is a really interesting game. I actually went back and forth a couple times. I remember when Clemson had PJ Hall, the big man, they were really good in the tournament. But I did go with Iowa. They got the senior point guard, Bennett Sturts. You know, there's nothing that special about it when you're talking about him as an NBA prospect, as a senior too. But this is the type of guy that could get really, really hot shooting threes in a game and just take it over. And at the end of the day, that's why I picked Iowa. Clemson doesn't have a shooter like that.
Yeah, I also saw that these are like out of the 68 teams in the tournament, these are some of the 2 slowest paced teams. So we're not going to be seeing, 100 versus 100 here. We might see 100 points in this game. I went with Iowa. They'll probably do it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, Vanderbilt versus number 12, McNeese, trying to make another March Madness run.
Yeah, no upset this time around. I'm okay not seeing their team captain either walk out with the boombox. Vanderbilt has been on a tear too. That SEC is ridiculous. A lot of points scored, and Even if it is another fast slow, that doesn't mean that McNeese is going to stop him from scoring 97 points against them. I'm taking Vanderbilt.
Yeah, usually in March Madness, you get your 15 minutes of fame and you get on out. There's not really a lot of times where that 15 minutes of fame comes back to next year. So I think McNeese is the one and done with Vanderbilt taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
4 seeded Nebraska versus 13 seeded Troy.
Interesting. Did you know Nebraska has never won a tournament game before? So this is one I've thought about for a little bit just to do my due diligence, but I am not going to have an upset yet on my bracket. Taking Nebraska. I want to see them get their first win. They did very well in the Big Ten, which it wasn't as good as the Big 12, of course. They can beat Troy.
I did go with Nebraska here as well, too. 6 versus 11 is North Carolina versus VCU.
This is where you're going to run into some trouble because North Carolina obviously is a blue blood school, but there's a chance they're going to be missing their top two players. One of them is Caleb Wilson, the big man, going to be a top pick in the draft. I couldn't pick UNC knowing that, so I got VCU going on a kind of a second crazy run of our lifetime. I think they made it to the Sweet 16 once when we were
Yeah, I did
growing
go.
up.
I think you're right. I went with VCU as well too. I feel like this is a good opportunity, especially casual fans. People just see UNC and pick them to move on. VCU usually a pretty good basketball school, and like you said, injury troubles for UNC. 3 seeded Illinois versus the Ivy League's representative here, UPenn.
Yeah, another one I had to think a lot about because coming from the Ivy League, like outside of the West Coast, this is the only other conference that was shooting threes 15 years ago. So, of course, they could drop 90 points on somebody and beat them. It's just not going to be Illinois. They have comeback wins against Tennessee, Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan. I don't think it's going to be them.
Yeah, I think a lot of these Big Ten teams, really good basketball conference, are pretty upset proof, at least in this early part of the tournament. So I did go Illinois as well too. St. Mary's versus Texas A&M.
A lot of people say it's all about the NIL money now, and maybe in the top 10 of college basketball. But outside of that, I'm still okay taking a team like Santa Clara. Um, it's not the best resume, but these guys are going to come and do two things great: shoot threes, play defense. It's the West Coast philosophy. It's Gonzaga, right? It's just in a different uniform.
Yeah, I chose St. Mary's on my first two brackets, so I went with the little variance here and chose Texas A&M. I don't really have any analysis for it. I haven't watched any of these teams play, but you can't pick the same team three times over, especially in these 7-10s. So I did go Texas A&M. Houston versus Idaho.
Yeah, we got Houston crushing them.
Yeah, same thing here. Moving to the West, same theme. Arizona versus Long Island University. Arizona takes that one. 8 versus 9 in the West is Villanova versus Utah State.
Really good game, right? Villanova probably should have been like a 4 seed this year. They ended up choking really badly in the tournament. They lost to Georgetown in the Big East tournament. Utah State, on the other hand, was able to rise out of the last season of the Mountain West, which is pretty good for basketball normally. So I'm going to go with Utah State. They got a way better offense, right? I normally will revert to the Big East if I'm tie broken on something, but Villanova left a bad taste in my mouth when they got blown out by a really bad team last week.
I went Villanova here as well too, or different than you, but reason why I wasn't locked in there is because I realized I started doing this order differently than how I said I was going to do it at the beginning of the episode.
Oh yeah, no, it's all good.
We're good now, obviously, but that was eating in me the whole time that you were talking. Next one though, Wisconsin versus 12 seeded High Point.
I like Wisconsin. They're normally pretty good every single year. They can get out of the first round. High Point, I don't know much about, so why would I do anything crazy here? It was my thinking.
Yeah, I just looked up where High Point is actually geographically located.
Yeah.
It's in North Carolina. There's not really a lot of high points there, which doesn't make sense to me. So I'll go Wisconsin. Largest geographical difference on this next matchup, Arkansas versus Hawaii.
This would be something. Hawaii also shoots the lights out of the place. Second place in the last year of the Mountain West for basketball. I couldn't do it though. Arkansas is so good. John Calipari's either getting knocked out in the first round or going on a crazy run. They got Darius A. Cuff Jr., one of the top guards in the nation. They're just getting hot too, and that's how you want it to be.
I did go Arkansas over Hawaii here as well too. Not much needs to be said. 6 versus 11, fun one. BYU versus either Texas or NCSU.
It's always important to keep an eye out for the play-in team that makes it out of there because they got an extra piece of adrenaline for them before the next game. But I couldn't pick against BYU. They're built for this situation. Maybe not a championship, but they have the best scorer in the nation in AJ DeBonsa, and they went out and got the point guard from Baylor on their last run, Robert Williams III. So they're going to be ready for at least a first-round matchup.
Yeah, usually when you have a top 2 or 3 player in the tournament, you tend to fare well, especially in your early games. Even in a case where it wasn't as big of a school, Murray State with John Morant, when you have a good player like that, you don't usually lose in the first round. And it's not that extreme here with BYU, considering they're a team that's pretty consistent in the tournament. But Devonsta is amazing. So they move on here. Fun matchup, very different schools. Gonzaga versus Kennesaw State, 3 versus 14.
We got to shout out Kennesaw State for only being in Division One in all these sports for a few years now. They have now won the conference in football and basketball, which is awesome. But they got to play Gonzaga. They're going to get smoked. It's a good run.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Gonzaga in 1. 7 versus 10, Miami versus Missouri.
7-10, always going to be a great game. Line's going to be close. I am going to go with Miami, though. Another team that got hot at the end of the season. They beat Louisville while fully healthy. Basically, they spent way more money on their team. They got like 4 guards from the Ivy League that are making $1 million, and that kind of thing is probably going to beat Missouri.
Yeah, usually these 7-10, 8-9s, we do see some like big conference versus big conference type of games, which are always fun. I did go Missouri here. No real rhyme or reason for it, but that's what I went. Purdue versus Queens is a 2 versus 15. We'll skip that one. And then 1 versus 16 is Michigan versus UMBC or Howard. UMBC, I don't think, even if they get through this, is going to be in Michigan. So we'll move on to Georgia versus St. Louis.
Dude, Georgia has burned me so many times on the bracket over the years that I decided I was going to pick them this year, no matter what, because they are always winning this 8-9 game. St. Louis, I've seen them play in person. It was a while ago in San Jose. I know that they tend to win their conference, but I'm sticking with the SEC school.
These two teams very fast paced is what I saw. A lot of scoring in this one, could be 200 total points. I did go St. Louis. Why not? 5 versus 12, Texas Tech versus Akron.
This is going to be one of the huge upsets I'm predicting in the first round, at least on this bracket. You know, we all like to make a couple different brackets. First reaction. Oh, wait, what about this team? Podcast bracket. So I went with Akron. Texas Tech's missing their best player, JT Toppin. They ended up flaming out and kind of bottling out of the Big 12 tournament. They weren't really involved in the last 6 teams there. And Akron just won the MAC, which is way better than normal. So I'm going off of vibes with this pick.
I went with Texas Tech. I'll explain why in a second. Alabama versus Hofstra, 4 versus 13.
I love Alabama point guard LeBaron Philon. He came back for a second year because he wanted to make a statement and go deeper in this tournament because it didn't really turn out that way with Alabama last season. I think he ended up making a huge name for himself this season, and he's going to go on a little run here.
I have Hofstra winning. Probably one of my biggest upsets, if not the biggest. Hofstra is a team that shoots the shit out of the ball. I think they are the lightning in the bottle team this year. Tennessee versus Miami of Ohio or SMU. What do we have?
I'm sticking with Tennessee on this one. We don't know yet. I will get into my layup in a second here. I did pick something based off of this game. but Tennessee's top 10 in offense and defense. So I stuck with them, even though they're a six seed.
I went Tennessee as well too. I know Miami of Ohio, if they even get here, is a team that's lost one game this year. But there's a reason why they were still a playing team with that because they play in the MAC, and it's that simple. 3 versus 14, Virginia versus Wright State.
I wanted to do it, man. I really wanted to do it, but I feel like we've been giving Virginia so much shit over the years. I'm going to give them a first round win over Wright State. If they can compete with Duke, they should be able to beat Wright State this year.
I went with UVA here as well too. 7 versus 10, fun one for Bay Area residents. Santa Clara versus Kentucky.
Yeah, I am going to go with Santa Clara. The vibes are just not there with Kentucky at all. Something's wrong with them, and we've seen that with a couple of the blue blood teams this season. But I just love those West Coast style games. The Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara triangle, all those games are really good, high scoring, and I think they could stop the defensive-minded Kentucky team for one night.
Yeah, Kentucky really hasn't been the blue blood that we saw when we were growing up. In these past 10 years, it really hasn't been the same Kentucky, probably because they don't have the same coach. But Santa Clara is a team that I chose here to win this game. And then Iowa State versus Tennessee State. I don't think we need to go super
Shout out
in-depth
Rob Covington.
Yeah. Back up to the East, which starts with Duke as the 1 seed. The round of 32, there's 4 games here. I'm going to have you say all 4 of your games because I obviously did not track all of your predictions. And so I don't want to, say, is it this team or is it that team? So give me the 4 games, give me the 4 winners, and then I'll do the same for mine.
All right. So for the East, my first game, 1 Duke and 8 Ohio State. Duke should win this one easily. I feel like we actually have seen this game like 3 times, which is funny, but this is usually as far as Ohio State gets. Duke is like the best team I've watched this season. Next game, 4-5, Kansas and St. John's. Mentioned it earlier. St. John's looked really, really good against UConn. Maybe something's wrong with UConn. Maybe it's just them, but tie goes to the Big East. So I'm taking them over Kansas. 3-6. I mean, this whole Eastern region is ridiculous because Michigan State, Louisville should be an awesome game, low scoring. I am going to go with Michigan State this year. They seem like the more well-rounded product, I guess, than Louisville just like letting the point guard take the keys and run. So I'm going to take Michigan State in a really low scoring game. They got Jeremiah Fears Jr. And then 7-2, UConn, UCLA. There's something wrong with UConn this year, dude. I don't think it's the coach at all. I mean, I think they just need some shooters, but they're not scoring enough points. I'm going to take UCLA. They've been scoring a ton of points all weekend. They beat Michigan State. They beat Illinois. They beat Purdue. They almost beat Gonzaga and Arizona. I really like UCLA. They're going to be a 7 going on to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, this is kind of like you mentioned, feels like a blue blood bracket outside of Northern Iowa for me. I mean, Duke is a team that we've seen consistently. Of course, they're a 1 seed. Kansas is a team that maybe not technically a blue blood, but a team that we've seen a ton in our lifetime. Same with Louisville, Michigan State with Tom Izzo. I know this is his farewell tour, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
So obviously when he's been there, they've always been good. UCLA, maybe less of when we were alive, but they have been basketball fans, but UCLA is definitely a blue blood. And then UConn, I mean, maybe not as much for men's basketball as they are women's basketball, but regardless, team during our lifetime that's had consistent national championship runs. So fun bracket. Here's my picks. 1 versus 9, Duke versus TCU. I chose Duke. Pretty easy there. Northern Iowa versus Kansas. Similar situation for Kansas here in the second round. I don't think there's going to be a person that can guard Darren Peterson, and that's a problem when it gets close into a late game. So Kansas moves on. 3 versus 6, Louisville versus Michigan State. Good old nostalgic feel here. I went with Michigan State. 6 seeds tend to not do well in the March Madness pool. I don't think there's been one who's even made the national championship since like the 90s, which is kind of crazy. And then UCLA versus UConn. I also chose UCLA.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just because of a West Coast versus Far East Coast. Maybe I'm thinking Rock Chalowski for some reason, even though he plays baseball. But I did go UCLA. Moving on here. In the South, the Florida bracket, that is, who do you have in your round of 32 and who's moving on to the Sweet 16?
All right, we'll start off with the Florida game. I think we both got them playing Iowa, which is really interesting. I mean, what a matchup, right? It's kind of the opposite strategy where Florida the whole idea is you pick a guy off the bench and he's going to be able to fit into the system. Iowa, there's one guy that's the system. Florida burned me last year when I did the same exact thing, so I'm going to pick Florida to move on in their own bracket. Nebraska Vanderbilt. Again, I hope this is a good game, but deep down inside, my gut is telling me Nebraska is going to get destroyed at some point in this tournament just because they're not used to it. They're not a basketball school. Vanderbilt also scores 90 points a game. That will help. Illinois against number 11 VCU. I ended up going with VCU here. Illinois, I think, is lacking something this year. It's not as good as the team last year with Kasparas, Yakachonis. And I know this is perfect timing, right? Which really means terrible timing. But I was going to say one of the teams I watched them choke against in the Big Ten, like Northwestern or something. I'm pretty sure I watched them lose to Northwestern. So that's probably why I'm taking VCU. And then we're going to close it off with Houston destroying St. Mary's. Houston has the best point guard in the nation, Kingston Flemings.
In the South, Florida versus Iowa for me. So same matchup that you had. I did go Florida. 5 versus 4, Vanderbilt versus Nebraska. So same matchup, although I did go Nebraska here. Number 11 VCU versus number 3 Illinois. I went Illinois. I haven't watched them, but they do play in the bigger conference. And then Texas A&M versus Houston, couple of Texas schools, which is cool. I went TAMU. No rhyme or reason, but usually there's a couple double-digit seeds that get into the Sweet 16, and I think a 10 seed in Texas A&M could be one. In the West, Arizona's bracket, what do we have?
We'll start it off with the Arizona game against 9-seeded Utah State. Normally, this is the kind of game that may give Arizona some trouble. Luckily for them, it's not San Diego State this year or Colorado State. It's Utah State. I think they're a tier below, and they're not going to be able to keep up with Arizona, maybe the hottest team in college basketball right now. 4-5, fantastic game. It's Arkansas and Wisconsin. If they can avoid upset, I would love to see all the firepower in this one. I'm going to go with John Calipari and the Hogs. I really like their point guard, like I was saying, Darius Acuff. It's kind of weird. This year, they just kind of sprouted out of nowhere. Every team's got a legit point guard, and that's going to make the tournament really exciting. And I want to root for those teams too. So that's why I'm sticking with Arkansas. BYU Gonzaga. Another one should be ridiculous, right? West Coast top dogs at the moment, at least. I'm sticking with Gonzaga, though. I'm not one to fuck with Gonzaga. If they have the better matchup, they're going to make it as far as they need to make it. And AJ gets to show off his skills for 2 games. So hopefully that's enough with him. The last one, Purdue, Miami. Purdue, also a team that kind of rubbed me the wrong way in the Big Ten championship. So I'm going with Miami. I think it was. Do you hear this train right now?
No, I do not.
Okay, good. Because it was really, I want to make sure. So I'll go right back into it. I got Miami beating Purdue, the 7 seed. I think it was at Brett's house when I was watching it with a bunch of people. Miami beat number 1 Auburn one year. And not that because they upset someone in the past, they got to do it again. It's just perfect timing for them. They scored a ton of points too. So Miami makes it through.
Yeah, 1 versus 8 for me. Arizona versus Villanova. Arizona wins that. And then Wisconsin versus Arkansas, same matchup, although I do have Wisconsin winning here. Number 6 BYU versus number 3 Gonzaga, fun West Coast matchup. I think if you were to take anybody else from the conference that Gonzaga plays in and put them up against BYU, you're like, oh yeah, BYU probably handles them, but Gonzaga, maybe a small school in stature. It's not a small school when it comes to basketball. They take care of business against BYU. They've been there before. The coach has seen it. They've won a national championship. Number 10, Missouri versus number 2, Purdue. I picked Purdue here, which sends us to our last round of 32, the Michigan bracket, the Midwest.
Okay. I got Michigan playing number 8 Georgia. I think they would win this one easily. Michigan has also been on a tear down the stretch. My next game for Alabama gets to play 12 Akron, and the crazy run ends there. Alabama probably doesn't even need to play a complete game. Just outshoot Akron, and you're moving on. Number 3 Virginia, number 6 Tennessee. Probably the best game so far on this side of the bracket. I went with Tennessee. Tiebreaker, probably Nate Ament, Tennessee's small forward. He is one of the top recruits in the nation and has not choked recently like Virginia has. So I do even Kyle. You remember Kyle Guy, the point guard
Of course.
of
Yeah.
Virginia. He went on CBS and had Virginia losing in the round of 32. So that makes me think there's something wrong with them inside the building too. And then the last game, Iowa State is so good. They've been ranked within the top 6 all season long. I think they should beat Santa Clara.
Yeah. 1 versus 9 for me, Michigan versus St. Louis. I have Michigan, the 1 seed, moving on. So all 1 seeds are safe so far for us through the round of 32. 5 seeded Texas Tech versus number 13 Hofstra. We're way different here. And I have Hofstra continuing their March Madness Cinderella run into the Sweet 16. 6 seeded Tennessee versus 3 seeded Virginia. I'll go Tennessee. I already had that picked, but your argument makes it a bit more convincing. And then 10 seeded Santa Clara versus 2 seeded Iowa. The Cyclones move on here. I don't think Santa Clara is going to be much of an issue for them. To the Sweet 16 we go. All 1 seeds alive, as I said. The 2 games in your East, starting off with Duke versus who? And the other one as well.
Yeah. I got Duke playing St. John's in this game. I would really love to see St. John's pull it out. My issue with them is sometimes they just don't show up. And I guess that's a Rick Pitino thing when that's your coach, but they'll beat UConn and then come back the very next day and lose by 32 points. And that can't happen in March Madness. Duke would not let that happen against them. And my other game over here, Michigan State, UCLA, going with Sparty in this one. Sparty, I may have gotten the pick wrong when it was against Michigan on the picks a month ago, but they really convinced me they're, one of the top 10 or so teams in the nation.
1 versus 4, Duke versus Kansas for me. A good old fun matchup. I did go Duke. I don't see too many scenarios where they don't get very deep in the tournament. They're super legit. And then 3 versus 7, the Tom Izzo magic continues. Gets them to the Elite Eight. Takes down UCLA. In the South, Florida bracket here.
Dude, we're starting off with an absolute banger in this one. Florida, number 1 seed, is playing their rivals, the 5th-seeded Vanderbilt Commodores, a team that has just, similar to Kennesaw, but on a way bigger scale, just kind of risen out of nowhere. And Vanderbilt just crushed them. Vandy is scoring 86 points per game this season. Very, very similar to Florida. I did it. I went with Vandy. No one has been able to stop them, and I love that this is part of the game now. Oh, next pick. My bad. Houston is playing 11-seeded VCU. This game probably wouldn't be close at all. Houston moves on.
Bit different for me. I have 1 seeded Florida versus 4 seeded Nebraska. Keeping it boring here. Florida moves on. And then 3 seeded Illinois versus 10 seeded Texas A&M. Kind of Cinderella run for Texas A&M. Does end versus Illinois. Which takes us to the West, which is Arizona.
All right. Well, I got Arizona playing 4-seeded Arkansas. I had the Hogs winning the last game. And I'm going to keep riding Arizona. I'm going to keep riding the Wildcats here. Just won the Big 12, best conference in basketball. Arkansas plays a little reckless compared to the Big 12. I think that's probably a recipe for disaster when you're playing like the best defensive team in the nation. And then after that one, I have Gonzaga and Miami. Matchup I would love to see too. Very high flying teams, but Gonzaga would shut them down and move on to play Arizona.
In the West, for me, it's Arizona versus Wisconsin. Arizona takes down Wisconsin here. Wisconsin's been one of the Cinderella type of teams in the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years of our generation. They don't get it done versus Arizona. Gonzaga versus Purdue, keeping it on the West Coast with this one. A couple of big time basketball schools, but Gonzaga gets a W, moves on to the Elite Eight. And then in the Midwest, the Michigan bracket. Do we have all of our one seeds moving on? What do you got?
Michigan will be moving on against Alabama. This is just not a great matchup for Alabama. I think they would love to play a team a little less man defensy, if that makes sense. They need some space to create. And Michigan tries to take that space away against everyone they're playing. The great game against Duke is what convinces me that they're good enough to outscore Alabama. And then the bottom game, Iowa State, the 2 seed against the 6 seeded Tennessee. I did go with the Vols. I wanted to have another SEC team because when I watch Iowa State, it's great. It's a great system. Problem is they miss a lot of free throws. They don't make a lot of great decisions. They don't shoot any threes outside of this one European dude, Momcilovic, who's pretty cool on Iowa State. I don't think it's going to be enough to beat Tennessee, even though they're a 6 seed this year.
In the Midwest, Michigan versus Hofstra. And as much as I would love to
That'd
piss
be
off
awesome.
Alex here, I cannot go Hofstra over Michigan. So they go into the Elite Eight pretty easily. 6 seeded Tennessee versus 2 seeded Iowa State. I have the Cyclones moving on as a 2 seed, which would set up a fun 1 versus 2 there. Which brings us to our Elite Eight. So that Elite Eight that we were talking about, starting off in the East, Duke versus who, and who's moving to the Final Four?
I got Duke playing Michigan State. This is a matchup I think everybody tries to predict close to. If there's an opportunity for it, you would love to watch it. When they played earlier, Duke beat them by 6. Really low scoring game. I would love a rematch of that. But like I said, Duke is the best team I've watched all season long. I don't think they're getting knocked out in the Elite Eight by a team who doesn't shoot very well.
Yeah, Duke versus Michigan State for me as well, too. I went with Duke. Seems like one of the top teams in the nation, if not the top team in the nation. I don't think they lose to Michigan State. In the South, Florida versus who?
I got Houston and Vanderbilt in
Oh,
mind.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
5 seeded
Yeah.
Vandy upsetting their conference rivals, Florida. And I have Houston winning against Vanderbilt in the Elite Eight to move on. Houston's defense is about 15 points per game better. They operate like a small ball team, yet they have some of the best shooters in the nation. That's why they're so dangerous.
My matchup in the South is Florida versus Illinois. I have Florida moving on. No really rhyme or reason. I tried to think of some analysis, but I don't have anything there. In the West, what do you have?
Oh, this is another great one. 1 seeded Arizona and 3 seeded Gonzaga. Oh, such a great matchup and such a tough pick, but I went with Arizona. Things feel different this time. They haven't made it this far in a very long time, but things feel different. Not only do they have the conference player of the year, they have Brandon Berry's a great scorer who's clutch. They have Koa Pete, top 10 pick with ridiculous athleticism who jumps out of the gym. That's just a lot more to operate with than Gonzaga does this year. This isn't a Chet Suggs team for Gonzaga, even though I do think they're good enough to compete with everyone.
Same matchup for me, Arizona versus Gonzaga. Although I did go Gonzaga. They've been here more recently. They have the coach that's been here recently as well, too. So I did go Gonzaga moving on to the Final Four. And then in the Midwest, Michigan versus what? Tennessee for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so Tennessee's having a great run on my bracket right now for a 6 seed. But here's where it ends with Michigan. Michigan is on a whole nother level. I think them and Duke played the best game of the season this year, and Tennessee probably not going to shoot as well as them. Of course, any given night with March Madness, but this is where my head's at. Michigan is a top 4 team right now.
Michigan versus Iowa State for me. Iowa State is one of the 5 teams in the trapezoid of excellence,
Okay.
which is net rating and pace. and I think Iowa State could take down Michigan. Maybe a bit of a surprise, but I do have Iowa State moving on to my Final Four. In the Final Four, East, South, West, Midwest, we'll start with the East, South, which is Duke versus Houston for you, correct?
Yes.
All right, give me that matchup.
Okay, Duke Houston, a 1-2. Obviously, I guess we haven't gone too exotic with our picks here, but these are the best teams in the world right now. And I stuck with Duke to beat Houston. I think there's a scenario where Houston beats them. Houston has beat them the last couple times they've played. This time, I think Duke gets them. What a really, really interesting Duke team we have right now with Cam Boozer. I think it's better than the Paulo team.
Duke, Florida for me. I think Duke probably wins this matchup more than not. But this is where it's like a move to win your bracket pool.
Yeah.
And so I did choose Florida over Duke here to get to the national championship. And then in the West Midwest, we have different matchups here. You have Arizona versus Michigan, right?
Yes.
Okay, give me that.
So the 2-1 seeds from that side of the bracket. Again, I'm kind of building the games I want to see with also making sure I have the March Madness tropes in there. Like you got to have your 12 seed in the Sweet 16 or whatever. But at the end of the day, these are the games I want to see. And the difference is Michigan just lost to Purdue, who turned out to not be a 1 seed, not be one of the best teams in the nation. Arizona goes on a ridiculous run, beating. You want me to read this off to you? Who they beat in the last 2 months? Florida, UConn, Alabama, BYU, Houston, Iowa State, Houston again. Crazy. I got Arizona.
Mine is Gonzaga versus Iowa State. Iowa State's the higher seed. I'll go Iowa State and move on to the national championship, which sets up Florida versus Iowa State for me. You have Duke versus Arizona.
Yes.
What do you have?
Duke and Arizona. I believe these are the two best teams in the nation. Not exactly how it's supposed to work every single year, but this is what I want to see. Duke's better on defense. They got the player of the year. Arizona's better on offense. They have the deeper roster right now. Duke is rated higher. I'm going with the Wildcats, though. I think it was the DeAndre Ayton year was the last time they went to the Final Four. I feel like they're due. And in a season where you don't really know what's going to happen, what's going on, there's so many great players all across the big conferences. It's just like college football now, honestly. And that's how I treated it. So I went with teams I know are going to come through for me. And I went with the Arizona Wildcats to beat Duke.
My national championship is Florida versus Iowa State. I think in all other four of my brackets, I have Duke winning. They just feel like a really good team. Obviously, here I went a little bit different with these two squads, and I did go Iowa State to win it in this matchup. Florida, like you said, they got blown out versus Vanderbilt in the SEC championship, or not championship, just in the SEC tournament. Obviously, if they get to Natty, like it probably doesn't linger with them, but best team that they've played so far in this, and I do have Iowa State. Kind of being a product of their environment, getting the win in the national championship, but probably also a team that not a lot of people are picking to win, which makes it a good reason to pick them.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our layups, our bold predictions. A quicker episode before we deal with probably the longest episode of our year with the MLB in season predictions, or in-depth season predictions. Layups predictions, bold predictions last week. I had the U.S. versus DR semifinal match occurring. There was no odds on that, but that required both of them to win their quarterfinal game. And they did. And then USA beat the DR in the semifinals. So probably not the most bold thing, probably like maybe minus 200 or something like that, but that does go green. Skylar had USA and Japan still go 6-0, which would have been a finals matchup that we see here. Fortunately, that does not happen. Would have been a fun matchup tonight, but that does go red. This week, Duke to the Final Four. I don't have the odds on that, but I assume it's probably just around even, or maybe even a little bit slightly less than even. So I went Duke to the Final Four with my layup pick.
Okay. My layup is going to be one of the picks that we talked about. just for a second because this game's happening tomorrow, not during the original bracket. I got SMU covering 6.5. Looks like a football line against Miami of Ohio. Miami of Ohio just disappointed me so much last week. They get knocked out in the first round of the MAC tournament. SMU, like I said, dude, like on a Tuesday night after the podcast, I've watched them whoop Louisville this season. They can beat Miami.
Last week, bold prediction, I had Italy qualifying over Mexico. At that time, I believe the Italy
That was a
versus
great
USA
pick.
game was just getting started. So obviously, I did not expect Italy to beat the US, but them beating Mexico is something I did have going back to our earliest predictions. So Italy qualifying over Mexico goes green. I believe at that time is about plus 200. Skyler had Miami of Ohio winning the MAC. They lose very early in the tournament to UMass. I was actually watching that game because I saw it was on and I saw it was close at like 10 o'clock on a Thursday. So I did throw it on for a few minutes. This week, I have Hofstra in the round of 32. That means they beat Bama. I believe right now it's like a plus 500 or plus 600 pick. So pick your upsets, man. This is one I have.
Yep. Also talked about mine for a little bit today. That's 12 seeded Akron to beat number 5 Texas Tech on Friday. That's a plus 270. A 12-5 always happens. It might not be this one, but another situation where I get to spit on Miami of Ohio a little bit here and hopefully get an upset pick right. Even though when I was looking back thinking of great upsets that I remember, I feel like I remember the near upsets just as much, which
Yeah.
is hilarious.
That's going to do it, though, for episode 285. Going to be a fun week this week. Usually the Thursdays and Friday slates of college basketball games where it's just games all day is really fun. Obviously, that expands into the weekend on Saturday and Sunday before we have a little bit of break into the Sweet 16. But when we talk to you next, it's going to be a very fun episode. Win totals for all 30 teams, award predictions, playoff predictions, breakout, busts, whatever you see. Just expect it all next week. It's gonna be fun. Any closing remarks? Go for the USA. You know.
Yeah. Let's go USA, of course. I got full confidence in Nolan McLean tonight. I know a lot of people were worried, but I think he's got nasty stuff and he'll figure it out. It's been fun to watch
Yeah,
the A's hit a bunch of homers this week, too. Like, can we start the
that,
season right now, please?
that's true. It'll be unfortunately we don't play on Wednesday, which is just the one game. Opening day is on Thursday. We actually don't play Thursday either. We
Oh,
play
geez.
Friday. So that first 48 hours of the season is probably going to be very, very long. But we're 10 days away from opening day now at this point for the A's in Toronto. I mean, we'll see how that one goes. Tough first 15 games for the A's, I'll say that. At Toronto, at Atlanta, back home, flying across the country to play Houston for 3, and then flying back across the country to play the Yankees and the Mets.
Yeah, heard about that.
For the first 15, that's a tough one. I'm sure I'll talk more about this next week, but if they go 6-9, I'm happy. You know, that's okay in their first 15.
I was joking with the guys the other night. It's like the A's might be 7-16, but 12th in the power rankings after the first month.
Yeah, schedule's tough to start, but we will get into that more next week. Gonna be a fun one. Follow me on Twitter. Get ready for some stuff coming out there as well too.
Yeah.
Pitchers I like, hitters I like, stuff like that. Got a couple fantasy drafts this week. We're in deep. It's gonna be
It's
fun.
that time of year.
Yeah. Alrighty. We'll see you guys next week. Go. I don't know Hofstra's
Go
logo.
Hofstra.
Yeah. The Owls? No. Hofstra logo. Bobcats? No. Maybe.
Feels like something I should know, but I'm forgetting.
Hofstra mascots. Mascots are Kate and Willie Pride, Lion and Lioness. So I think they just called the Hofstra Pride, if I remember correctly, actually
Okay.
now. Kind of unique, but go Hofstra.
Yes, sir. See you next week. for the full in-depth MLB preview.
Go.